Well, let's stay with the story then. COSATU is unhappy with the latest move to curtail the ballooning public wage bill. The Trade Union Federation issuing a statement a little earlier on in the day saying that if government does not honor its latest commitment to the public service wage agreement, there will be war. Well, let's discuss this further. We're joined by Tony Ehrenreich. He's COSATU's Deputy Parliamentary Officer. Tony, good evening. Thank you for your time tonight. You're certainly talking tough in the statement that you've issued publicly. I wonder if it at all is a reflection of the nature in which the negotiations have been taking place behind closed doors.
Well, I think there's got to be tough talk because collective bargaining is one of the cornerstones of the industrial relations framework in South Africa. In fact, the duty to bargain and the right to strike is enshrined in law. And the reason for that is because one of the ways in which we redistribute wealth in society is through wage bargaining. So when the biggest employer, the government, now says it's going to renege, it's not going to honor a wage agreement that they have with the union, this is unacceptable. But more importantly, it sends a signal to every other employer or employers association to back out of whatever wage agreements or conditions of employment agreements they have. And if that's the case, what we're going to see is the financial and governance crisis being compounded by an industrial relations crisis. So clearly, government's not playing this wisely. In fact, it's incredible that they would behave in this fashion towards public service workers who are the backbone of service delivery and governance in the country.
Sure. Of course, it's one thing to criticize the fact that government is not honoring its agreement as it had already signed off in terms of the public wage increases are concerned. On the other hand, though, if the state is saying they simply don't have the money to do this, I wonder what you're going to put on the table that would counter that, because they're saying they just don't have the money.
Well, of course, it's not that they don't have money. The budget has a huge amount of money in it. The question is, what are your priorities? And it's clear that the government's priorities are not the workers, are not the poor in this country, because if it was, we wouldn't have seen an escalation of the inequalities between the rich and poor people. And that's really, in broad terms, an escalation between the gap between the wealthier white communities and the poorer black communities. And this must be something that government addresses. So they've got the money. Why don't we reduce the wages of public representatives, MPs in Parliament? Why don't we reduce the wages of executive directors, DGs and others? They earn extravagant amounts of money that's really in line with the old apartheid wage structure that existed, and now you're servicing the majority of poor black people in this country. You don't need the exorbitant salaries and the extravagant perks that those leaders have. That's where you start reducing if you want to rebuild trust with people who've been pushed away from a government because of really rampant corruption and looting of the public purse. So there is money. The question is, where do you cut? And you can't cut at the lowest part of the labor market in the public service. And you can't cut at those services that are essential for poor people. Healthcare, where there's really long queues in hospitals, there's not sufficient policing to deal with the criminal activities, and there's not enough nurses in the healthcare services. So if anything, you need more public servants, not less. And you certainly must reward them properly so that you maintain them in the public service and make sure that the public is getting decent services. So for the government to respond in this way is completely unacceptable. And that's why COSATU says they're going to war around it, because it's not only affecting public service workers. Every other worker who's organized and who's bargaining collectively will now face a situation where their employers are now going to want to walk away from the wage deals and the conditions of employment, and that will not allow. There will be chaos in this country with the entire organized workforce going on strike against a government who seems not to care about the needs of workers.
I wonder, Tony, when you look at some of the adjustments that have been made, because you talk about the perks that, of course, some public officials are entitled to. The minister has, of course, reaffirmed some of the adjustments, such as people having to fly economy class, some of the changes to their cell phone bills, accommodation, etc. So do you think that that doesn't go far enough?
Well, the difference between flying economy class and business class may be a huge amount of money, But the difference between that is that workers have no metro rail to travel with to work or home every day because the service has collapsed completely. So still, the rewards and the focus of government is on the middle classes, on the wealthy sectors of the government elite, and not on the people that need it most. And so what we've got to do is to make sure that we address that. SAA can shut down if there's a question of whether SAA continues or whether Metro Rail continues, and its impact on the lives of so many more people and their destitution in future. So government's done some stuff, but it's just window dressing. We need significant moves in the direction of closing the gap between the public representatives, the officials that we put in government, and the people who they're meant to serve. Have they forgotten that governance is about service to the people? So how can you be enriching yourself at the cost of service to the people? The 2 million rand salary bills of many of these senior state employees is absolutely ridiculous when you look at the huge minimum wages that so many workers have. The new minimum wage has just been set in place as 20 rand an hour. That's about 3,500 rand a month. So you can't even start to compare it. Government must know where their focus is, and their focus can't be on the elites and the rich. It must be on restoring the confidence with the majority of people in South Africa. And if we then need to tighten our belts, we must see our public representatives and leaders tighten their belts before us. The social distance between leaders in business and in government is clearly unacceptable, and it's too far removed from the majority of people in South Africa.
Tony, in the statement...
But the final point is just on the question of what is the wage bill at the moment. At the moment, the government concedes that the wage bill is 35% of the total government expenditure. This was 34% 10 years ago. So we've seen a massive increase in the number of people in South Africa, but we haven't seen the committed increase in the number of public servants and their wages to address the service to those communities. So government's on thin ice here. They're neglecting the needs of poor people. They're not focusing on where the priority should be. And even though COSATU supports the government and supports the ANC, these are the kinds of things that's going to destroy that relationship, because it shows a complete disregard. We need to do so much more to change this country into one we promised our people in the Freedom Charter, and we can't have a government that works diametrically opposed to what that value system should be.
I just want to build a little bit on that, Tony, because in your statement you also say that this move will cause you to part ways with government. I wonder, are you now going to be on a warpath with the state, and more specifically with President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, we're really concerned after Cyril Ramaphosa comes along and puts in place the national minimum wage, the job summit to deal with a number of issues to create employment, as well as the investment summit. We then see his finance minister come and take a diametrically opposed view that forces workers to pay for the chaos that was caused by looting and state capture. So we think that there seems to be a disjuncture between the president and the finance minister. But be that as it may, the government must take responsibility. The buck stops for Cyril Ramaphosa. If Cyril Ramaphosa is not going to add deed to his words of making sure we build a country that takes account of the needs of all of our people, more especially the poor. Because look, a government must be measured about what it does for the poor and the needy, not for the wealthy and people in the suburbs. It must look after its constituency, poor black people who votes for it. So that must be where the priority is. And that's not where it is at the moment. So we're not addressing that, an issue that COSATU and Labour in South Africa generally feel strongly about, then we're going to be on a collision course with the government, with the ANC, and with the president who we've supported. But there's no blank checks. We made a blank check with President Zuma, and we saw how our country was destroyed and the interest of working class people. There will be no more blank checks. We want what is in the best interest of our country and what builds a reliable, sustainable country for the future that puts the needs of the poor first.
All right, Tony, let's leave it there for tonight. He's, of course, with COSATU, Tony Ehrenreich there. It's certainly going to be interesting to see how this story unfolds. I tell you what, there might be a shift politically if COSATU stays true to its word and makes good then on some of the threats that they're putting out there. Of course, a lot more negotiations still set to take place. Those increases, those that, of course, the finance minister has announced today that they do not have money to implement, were set to come into effect on the 1st of April. So there's literally about a month to get finality on this matter. We're going to take a short break. I'm back with your headlines and more reaction to the the budget speech tonight.